I mean, there's a lot going on today. I don't know how much of the weekend you were able to read all of the stuff in the Sunday Times about Keir Starmer, but it's a very strange picture that they're painting of. There's this new book that's been put out, Gabriel Pogren from the Sunday Times, one of the authors of it. And they talk about, you know, Starmer's kind of weirdness and about how he always wanted to be leader of the Labour Party, didn't know why. You know, he doesn't really have any ideology at all. He doesn't really feel particularly driven by any great need to change the country politically. He does not, in fact, they more or less describe him as not really a politician, a kind of HR manager.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's also reported in the Mail today, and they kind of basically describe him as a bit of a HR manager, I think is really the way to put it. It's also interesting because they sort of talk about his personality and the way that he is, the way that he talks with people, the way that he behaves in the workplace, and that kind of thing. And I think it is really interesting. It does make him seem quite sort of unsociable, as though he doesn't really know how to talk to other people, and it does make him feel a little bit less popular. I mean, he already feels quite stale, I think as somebody that watches him on television. I've never met him in person. He comes across as quite stale, a bit like a statesman, and of course a bit like a lawyer, and this book particularly paints him in that way.
I've only met him once, and he's very, very sort of strange, I would say. It's the best word I can use to describe him. And I made a little quip to him, and he just kind of looked at me like he didn't quite understand what I meant. And it was kind of like, this was nothing going on behind the eyes kind of look, you know. But I mean, it's quite humiliating, and they say it, humiliation for Prime Minister, because many people now inside the Labour Party are saying he's not capable of running a bath. And they've worked out that the reason that the government is so unpopular is probably because of him.
Yeah, it's interesting. So that's the headline in the Mail on page 7. Humiliation for PM as allies say he's incapable of running a bath. I think it's really interesting. A lot of it is coming from Morgan McSweeney, who is, of course, the former advisor that ended up...
He's the sort of kingmaker figure, isn't he?
Yes, yeah. He's sort of the chief of staff that apparently reported all of this stuff, and, of course, had that infamous spat with... Sue Gray in Number 10, of course. Apparently it created quite a hostile work environment.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, I was reading that piece yesterday evening, and my God, it sounded like the worst place in the world to work. I mean, I've been in those kind of toxic workplaces in Fleet Street and stuff, where you walk in the morning and people are literally trying to kill each other, you know, trying to stab each other in the back and, you know, mess up what they do. It's quite remarkable.
It is, and it does sound like he is, really, Sir Keir Starmer is basically overseeing all of this. There was some really interesting stuff, really interesting quotes. Like a manager, not a leader. I'm in two minds about Keir. The plus side is he's intelligent, decent. He's not Ed Miliband or Neil Kinnock. He's not a nutcase like Gordon Brown.
Yeah, that's from Tony Blair. I love that he's still calling Gordon Brown a nutcase.
Still calling him that. But he's not John Smith either. I mean, he's like John Smith, but without his class. He's basically a London human rights lawyer who's not in touch with the people, perceived as an over-smooth lawyer-like person. Too soft, not tough enough, inexperienced.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, especially the kind of weak characterisation in the book specifically. I mean, some of these quotes are quite scathing, and actually it does paint him as a picture as kind of a very weak leader, somebody who's incapable of leading the party itself, but also ultimately the country.
Yeah, and I wonder if a lot of the criticism of him is coming from behind the scenes from Angela Rayner's people, because mysteriously and miraculously, she comes out of it all quite good. She comes out of it quite well, you know, like he tried to fire her, he couldn't fire her. Remember that time when she was being briefed that she'd been fired as Deputy Prime Minister, or Deputy Leader, sorry, after the Hartlepool by-election in, I think it was 2020, was it? And then suddenly she wasn't, not only was she not fired, but she had 3 more jobs, because she's got all this kind of union power behind her, and she really appears to be quite a manipulative type of woman.
So I think with Angela Rayner specifically, it is the union power. It is the fact that the majority of Labour Party finances come from unions. Angela Rayner has a huge amount of power within that sphere. The unions respect her a lot, and they like her a lot, and they kind of see her, I suppose, as a bit of their own puppet in that respect. I think if Sir Keir Starmer is going to be worried about anybody, it should probably be Wes Streeting. He's got quite a lot of support within the Labour Party. I've heard rumours that he sort of goes round, you know, all the different bars within Parliament trying to gain support from other Labour members of Parliament. I think in some ways...
Starmer?
As in Wes Streeting
Wes Streeting, yeah.
I think just in case, you know, in case things happen, Wes Streeting has incentive to want to come across as popular. But as the Health Secretary, he has made quite a few bold statements. And I think that what's interesting is he comes across as very, very different to Keir Starmer, in that Sir Keir Starmer comes across as this stale manager, not a leader.
Yeah.
Wes Streeting, I think, is actually a lot more charismatic.
Oh, he is.
And I think he has a bit more. I mean, it's a little bit scary.
But he's been a bit disappointing, I think, since he's been in charge of health. He hasn't really done all the things that he said he was going to do, like a lot of the people in government. He's just kind of gone, oh, well, we'll put that one to the back burner, that one over there, you know. And the problem for Starmer as well, he's away so much. I mean, he's away again in Brussels today. Front page of the Times has got him going to be given a bit of a lesson from Emmanuel Macron. French tell UK to eat humble pie on breakfast, and the Prime Minister will be the first to attend an EU dinner in 5 years. Well, that tells you all you need to know. I mean, you're from the Institute of Economic Affairs. You must be a bit alarmed about this cozying up to Europe business. It's
interesting. So for the Institute of Economic Affairs newsletter this week that came out yesterday, I wrote an intro essay about Brexit, and obviously it's been 5 years since we left the European Union. What has actually happened, and what we can actually do to take full advantage of those Brexit freedoms. It's absolutely unequivocally clear to me that somebody like Sir Keir Starmer doesn't want to do all of those things that I outlined. But there are so many different regulations that we can cut. And we've got a huge number, I think about 19,000 regulations that are as a result of EU directives. We're talking about the fact that in work we're not allowed to work any longer than 48 hours, or at least be paid for any work at more than 48 hours.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, loads of these European directives are still in place, aren't they?
Yeah, they're on place. I mean, directives are basically the directives have caused all of these regulations to occur in the UK, and we've not repealed any of them. One of my favourite examples of things that we've not done post-Brexit is Moroccan tomatoes. So I'm half Moroccan. We currently impose tariffs and quotas on Moroccan tomatoes, making them more expensive for British consumers. So the reason why your tomatoes are so expensive in those shops is the majority of them come from Morocco, but the UK government still imposes tariffs and quotas. The only reason why we do that...
Oh, sorry, I thought the EU was against tariffs.
Well, no, they're not.
No, I know.
You're very funny, Mike. The only reason why we do that is to protect Spanish growers. It's to protect Spanish growers of tomatoes. And even though Morocco are our largest importers of
And the Spanish
tomatoes,
love us so much that they want us to stop buying houses in Spain, or they want to tax us at 100% if we do.
They do, and we're being so kind to them because we're still imposing tariffs and quotas on Moroccan tomatoes in order to protect them. So, I mean, it's one example. I would say it's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, very good. See what you did there.
For, in terms of one of our Brexit freedoms, but it's a really good example of completely pointless stuff that we've just not bothered to change.
Also, we had a guy who rang in last week who said to us, he's a businessman up in the north of England, and he says ever since Brexit happened 5 years ago, it hasn't changed his business at all. He's been perfectly happy exporting stuff to the EU. But as of, I think, last Friday, there's a new law that kicked in, thanks to the Labour government, which means that he now has to fill in a load of paperwork. So they've actually now made it more complicated. And when you see people like, I mean, I don't know if we've got it, we haven't got it yet, but we had Davey at the weekend talking over Laura Kunsberg's show about how we need to get closer alignment with the EU, making absolutely no sense, gobbledygook about, you know, how much better off we'd be if we were in the EU. And she pointed out to him, and she's hardly, you know, the world's greatest Brexiteer, she pointed out to him, but have a look at their growth and their economies. Actually, Germany is a negative, you know, France is pretty much flatlining. There is no country in Europe doing any better than Britain is at this moment. So who's to say that Brexit was a bad thing? No,
Brexit absolutely wasn't a bad thing. And let's be very clear about the economics of this. The difference between UK imports and EU imports and UK exports and EU imports is basically negligible. So there is basically been no real economic disaster. All of this kind of Project Fear nonsense a lot of people have been talking about over the last 5 years did not happen. The UK is not in any worse of a position now than it was within the European Union. However, now we have created loads of levers that just need to be pulled. There are so many things that we could be doing that would make Brexit, not just Brexit a success, but make the United Kingdom as a whole a success that we are not doing.
But Starmer's not going to pull those levers, is he? Because he's gone over there basically to be told off by Emmanuel Macron and to, you know, remember the last time they were together on that ridiculous tank driving through Paris like they just conquered it.
It was particularly strange optics, I think. Yes, this is front page of the Times. So the title is French tell UK to eat humble pie on Brexit. I think it's interesting because Sir Keir Starmer definitely doesn't have the same attitude that I suppose I have towards Brexit, which is that, you know, there are all of these opportunities that we could be seizing. It seems as though what he actually wants to try and cosy up to the EU, and instead what's actually going to happen is they're going to tell him, look, you know, just admit Brexit wasn't the success that you hoped it would be. And I think that we should absolutely do the complete opposite. I mean, Who is our biggest trading partner? It's the United States.
United States, exactly.
I think that the one golden ticket that would be the sort of the one golden prize that Brexit could give us is a free trade agreement with the United States.
With the United States, exactly right.
Now, of course, that depends on what they do.
Right.
There are so many things that we can do that we aren't doing. So we could, again, slash all of those regulations. REACH is one of them.
Yeah.
So the something to do with chemicals, basically. It means that we have to go through all of this animal testing with chemicals.
Yeah.
It costs the UK economy billions, costs the chemical industry absolutely huge amounts of money. We could also scrap VAT on a lot of things.
Yeah.
There are so many things that we could be doing as a result of Brexit that we aren't doing. So basically, what we've done is we've remained out of the European Union.
Yes,
that is him in the tank.
I mean, I wonder if they're going to get the tank out for today's visit to Brussels and just have him driving around in it.
I think they've realised it looked quite bad.
It really does. We've got a clip actually from Donald Trump, and this is from last night, talking about possible tariffs for Britain and the EU.
Prime Minister Starmer has been very nice. We've had a couple of meetings. We've had numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. And we'll see whether or not we can balance out our budget. With the European Union, it's $350 billion deficit. So obviously something's going to take place there.
Yeah, he's not keen on the EU at all, which is quite good news. Also, Starmer this weekend had a guest at Chequers. Guess who it was? Olaf Scholz, the German leader. So he's now cozying up to the Germans as well, just before he goes to Brussels. So he's got all his ducks in a row. No doubt Scholz will have been telling him. And he's not much longer for this world in terms of running Germany, because, you know, they're about to be taken over by the right wing, aren't they?
Yes. So Olaf Scholz is the German Chancellor. I think it's interesting because there does seem to be a bit of internal politics domestically in the European Union. Things are going terribly within Europe. I must be very clear about this.
Absolutely.
The EU have basically gone down an even more over-regulatory, overly taxed sort of path, and the UK, I mean, things are pretty bad in the UK, but things are absolutely worse than the EU.
They're a lot worse there, yeah. And their immigration problems are worse than ours, even though ours are pretty bad. I mean, theirs are even worse. Theirs are
even worse. I think what's really interesting is actually the way that they've set up their institutions means that they probably can get away with a lot of this stuff. So France, for example, I mean, they are much more likely to build more houses. They have a much more liberal regulatory system, which means that they actually can survive this kind of stuff, whereas other countries in Europe aren't able to do that. I mean, Germany really is now the new sick man of Europe. Now that we've left, I think what's interesting about the Trump clip, Donald Trump effectively saying that he's going to impose all of these global tariffs, I think is a bad thing, right? It's trade wars, it's politics, but let's be very clear, trade wars like this only end up hurting consumers. If he imposes global tariffs, it will hurt Americans. It will make Americans
not necessarily. We disagree on that, but we'll come back to that because we'll have a row about it in a minute, because there's lots to do. We've got to stop for a moment. We're also going to ask the question, has Sir Keir Starmer broken COVID rules? Because that's a question that's being asked now all over Britain, because it looks as though he had a voice coach into Downing Street, or into Labour Party headquarters, I should say, back in 2020, when we were supposed to be in Tier 4. Remember all those tiers that we had? We'll talk about that, plus a lot more. Reem Ibrahim is here from the IEA. This is Morning Glory. We'll see you after this.